you want to find out whether they're looking for you. But how do they know if they're looking for you if you don't know who you are? And it's amazing. The more honest and forthright and candid that you are, the higher the probability you get the right job for yourself.
Welcome to We Are All Worker Bees, a podcast about what work actually looks like right now. The uncertainty, the shifts, and the real people navigating it from every angle. I'm Nikki Beqaj.
And I'm Hive Co. Roth.
What are employers really looking for in 2026? And when companies say they want culture fit, what do they actually mean? Today, we're talking to Jim Beqaj, a corporate recruiter, executive coach, and leader who's hired nearly 1,000 people across industries and around the world. He's not just filling roles, he's building teams that last, and he's seeing a shift. Employers aren't chasing perfect credentials anymore. They're looking for something deeper. In this conversation, we'll break down the real traits that hiring managers are prioritizing beyond the resume. We'll talk about why adaptability is beating experience, how AI is flooding inboxes but not replacing judgment, and what true fit really looks like in a hybrid, fast-changing world. In learning about your background, you've personally hired more than 1,000 people in the course of your career, which is fantastic. How would you say hiring has really changed since you started?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here with the two of you. I'd say the most profound difference in hiring is that it's become much more difficult to have the real you come out of the pack of resumes and applications and all of that stuff. I think historically, resumes sort of really were more like who people were, and as the evolution of time and online resumes and online job things have created, and everybody's got word parsing, and everybody's learned what words to put in. I think through that whole process, people have lost sight of actually who I am, and companies have lost sight of who I'm actually looking for. And so we've developed this world of buzzwords that people are trying to navigate and figure out at the end of the day, not what's the right fit for me from the company's perspective, but how do I interview A way with this company and B with this company, as opposed to just being who they are. I think that's the biggest thing. And I think for corporations, they spend their time trying to figure out who you are amongst this bunch of data, and you try to figure out what they're trying to figure out. And this game of cat and mouse sort of goes back and forth with each other, as opposed to this is who I am and this is what we're looking for. And yes is a good first answer, and no is a great second answer.
Right, right. That's interesting, because I see that a lot where the workers are trying so hard to adapt to the mold of whatever's on the job description. And to your point, the customers are putting together a job description oftentimes that's so vague and not really what the work is, that you're feeling it on both sides. So how do you get that perfect match, right?
Exactly. And part of it is because the companies, when they're creating these job descriptions, are more often not creating unreal expectations. Like while someone's filling it out, they go, well, they should have 5 years experience. Well, why don't we make it 10? Okay, let's make it 10. And, they should have this and they should have that. And the reality is a lot of that stuff doesn't really matter, right? When the right person, in fact, a lot of times when people get a job, people often say, well, that's interesting. They didn't have 80% of the things we thought we needed. So part of the problem is the companies don't actually know what they're looking for.
And what do you recommend is the right way? Because we hear a lot from workers that are trying to navigate the job hunt these days. You need to get past those screen filters to even get a look. So in terms of that balance between trying to beat the filters, as you say in the game, and trying to bring out your humanity, is the resume still the right place to do that?
Resume is the worst document to represent who you actually are. As a matter of fact, oftentimes when people come to see me for coaching advice on how to get jobs. And I always give them my book, True Fit, How to Find the Right Job by Being You. And I hold up the resume like an old Kleenex, and I say, is this the best interpretation of who you are? And they always say, no, it's not. It's really just a trip itinerary of where I've been. And because there's no standardization to it, we've become part of this world where I need it, but I don't really follow it. And I need it, but it doesn't really represent who I am. So I encourage people, obviously, shameless pun, but to read my book and create something called an infomercial on themselves with 4 things that are really important so that you can represent yourself. Even if you're sending it Hive Co online, you still send this within it. And the first one is, what should I pay you for? What are the 3 things that you can do that make me money or save me time? And then maybe a little story to go with each of them, anecdote. And then secondly, think about people that I've worked with throughout my life that have been seamless, effortless. What are the characteristics of those people? How do you resolve conflict? Because conflict resolution permeates how people see you. If you're competitive in your conflict resolution style and you go to a place that's avoidance or accommodating, they say, oh, you're selfish, you're just about yourself. But if you go to a competitive place, they give you a little knuckle sandwich, like, oh, it's great to have you here, it's fantastic. And then the last thing is, what's a perfect day? No money, no title, nothing else. What are you physically doing in that perfect day? And in 25 years of doing this, I found that if you can chin yourself up to being honest about this is who I am, those 4 slides will either resonate with someone or they won't. And that's exactly what you want. We don't want any ambiguity. And so through all of this noise, you have to have something different. You have to have something that catches people's attention. And so what's the most important thing when someone's sitting across from you? What's in it for me to hire you? Now, if I hold up a CV, where do I find that, right?
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful point because one of the things that I'm seeing employers, they're paralyzed a little bit, right?
Yeah.
We've heard the word gluttonous, right?
Yeah.
There's so many candidates to choose from, and each hire is under more scrutiny than ever. So, what we see here is by being able to stand out, you move the process along, right? Is that
Exactly.
something?
And either way, I have people say to me, oh, that didn't work out very well. And I go, great. They go, fantastic. And they go, no, but it didn't work out very well. And I said, exactly. But if you're truly honest about yourself, because the fear that you should have is, say I'm interviewing at the Royal Bank, I interview a certain way, and I'm interviewing at the Bank of Montreal, and I interview a different way. Well, what if the Royal Bank's looking for the person that's interviewing at the BMO and the BMO's looking for the person? Like, you can't outguess that, right? So to have one common standard, which is, this is who I am. I'm not shaping myself to what I think you want or maybe don't want or how I should look or how I shouldn't look, and then lay it out. And if they say no, then it's great. But somebody will say yes.
Well, I think it's such a key point because oftentimes, you mentioned it, the employers aren't exactly sure what they're looking for. But it's that, and the job descriptions are all keyword based, they're all skills based. And really what you're looking for is a fit in the organization to propel it forward. And I think that's just such pragmatic advice to say it's the unwritten job description is what
Yeah.
can set you apart. So be yourself.
Well, it's sometimes like going shopping and, you go to the store and they say, can I help you with anything? What are you looking for? And you go, I don't know what I'm looking for, but when I see it, I'll know it, right? And it's very much the same with if you're not afraid to be honest about yourself and not afraid that they may say you're not what we're looking for, that's okay. There's a greater likelihood you'll find the right fit, and people will be impressed that you take that kind of approach, right? That you're not trying to, I like coffee. No, we only serve tea. Well, I like tea too. That type of jumping all over the place, right?
So it's interesting. What's your perspective and advice to employers, right? Because employers, they say, they're screening for specific skills. And then you're saying the real key to success is the culture fit. So how do you advise employers to balance, what they say in their job descriptions versus what actually leads to success?
Well, I say to employers that I work with, I say, in order to understand what you're looking for, if you could have more of anybody, who would you like more of? And there's not an employer out there that doesn't tell you immediately, I'll take another Nikki, I'll take another Hive Co, but I won't take another Jim, right? And so break down the DNA of those people. I'll give you an example. One of my clients down in the States had a 30% turnover ratio, a lot of trouble. And they said, can you give us some questions to ask to do a better job interviewing? And I said, no, but if you could have more of anybody, who would you want more of? They gave me 11 names, just like that, in a second. So I interviewed all 11 people. So I went back to the management team and I said, the commonality of the 11 people is 8 of them are firstborn children. 3 of them are only children. 5 of them have had a military background and moved no less than 5 times.
Hmm.
And those are the people you tell me you want more of. Now, are these people doing the interviewing of the people coming in? The answer was no. Hang on a second. You want more of these people, but they're not doing the interviewing of people coming in. Now, that turnover ratio in the last 2 years has gone from 30 to 5% because they actually know everybody's got skills. Everybody's qualified to a certain extent, right?
Hmm.
And so it's not about deciphering that part. It's deciphering, what am I actually looking for? Am I looking for a leader? Am I looking for a follower? Am I looking for a mediator? Am I looking for someone to come in and drop a hand grenade on, blow the place up? Someone to work diplomacy wise? What are the characteristics? And so if you as a candidate can show who you really are, you're actually doing the employer's job by deciphering and figuring out whether you're the right candidate or not, right?
I
That's
love
powerful.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jim, you have a philosophy that happy and engaged employees are more productive, extremely productive, right? So do you think most organizations understand the correlation between happy and engaged employees?
I think everybody thinks that that's what they're trying to do. And I think everybody believes that if I had happy and engaged employees, I would have a more productive workforce.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't actually think that most organizations figure out how to make that happen.
Do you think it's because they don't know how, or do you think it's prioritization, a timing? Like what do you think when you say when you mention that?
Well, I think it's because the model needs to be flipped. And the model is, we have a static job description, static organizational structure. So, we put you in at Hive Co, and the first thing somebody always says is, we put you in a CFO job. Here are the things he's really good at. Here are the things he's not really good at. We got to figure out how to support him in these things that he's not good at. Well, my philosophy is, let's take him away. Let's give him more pieces of the things that he's good at. Who cares what the CFO job description looks like? It doesn't fit everybody. And so we have to be willing and adaptable to change the job descriptions to suit the people. Whereas time in memoriam, we try to get people to kind of squeeze in to these job descriptions. They're going to fail at certain parts of it. And somebody's going to say, oh, I guess they weren't as good. Like, organizations are looking for perfection. They're looking for well-rounded. There's nobody well-rounded. There's just more or less well-rounded, and there's no perfection. So I think that it's hard for them to do it because it really takes profoundly changing their philosophy on how they run their business. That's why startups, as you would know, you don't have someone doing stuff they're not good at. You would say to them immediately, okay, you're not doing that anymore. You suck at that, right? And then over to you, Nikki, or over to you, Bill or Mary, right? And why should that be any different for organizations?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's one of the skills that we're seeing because all too often employers are asking, what have you done? Right? What have you accomplished? And really, I think with technology changing as much as it is, society is changing, jobs are changing so much, we're seeing adaptability become a trait that more organizations are looking for. Is that something you're seeing?
The world's moving at such a rapid rate, and with AI, and pressure on quarterly reports and quarterly earnings and all of those things. I think it's hard for organizations to really know what they're looking for. They're trying to project forward. What does our workforce look like? Not today, but in 2 and 3 years and or 5 years. And 5 years ago they would have been completely wrong about today. So it becomes even more important to really understand for an organization, what are the skill sets? There's two pieces to it, right? What are the skill sets that I'm looking for? And what's the personality and what's the type of person that I'm looking for, right? And those two things are the most critical job pieces that organizations are trying to figure out. But in some cases, they don't know what they don't know. So it's the candidate's responsibility to sort of educate them about, sort of do some homework, understand where their weaknesses are, understand where you think you could fit, where you could make an impact on them, and then almost think as if you're working there now.
So you mentioned, two of the most important aspects of kind of the hiring cycle on behalf of like, an organization being personality, you have skill set. I'm curious if you could lean a little bit more in how you believe employers define the value of a candidate in this day and age.
Well, I think first of all, let's talk entry level, sort of coming out of university and stuff like that, which is probably a good portion of the population still. Um, there's a minimum requirements. I think most organizations look for diversity. I don't mean diversity of religion and background and history and stuff like that, but diversity of what you've done in your life, right?
Mhm.
And I don't think it really matters what it is, but if you've traveled, if you've got a broader view on the world, if you've charity work, camps, all kinds of different things to provide this sort of more well-rounded perspective about who you are, because all of that interaction, all of that experience makes you more valuable to fit into an organization. Also, interestingly enough, and more so now, I think if you've done kind of riskier things, that maybe started a business, worked for someone, did this, did that, things that are kind of offline, not sort of the regular, oh, I went to Goldman Sachs for the summer and then I was this and that. I think organizations are looking for people that are adaptable, flexible, have different type of work experience and background, because they are recognizing they're putting a mosaic together of skills and people and personalities. Whereas I thought 10 or 20 years ago, it was, pretty well straight down the pipe. You either went to these schools or you didn't. You either got these grades or you didn't. And that was the filtering process. So I think that sort of lens has really turned. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So, thinking through the workforce and how things have really changed in the last 5 or 6 years, right? You had the shift to hybrid, then the work from home over the pandemic, right? And now you have this word that we all are very familiar with, AI. Do you think broadly that companies have adapted with these shifts, and demanded from their workers appropriately with these shifts?
I don't think there's a company out there that can move fast enough to adapt. And I think part of the problem is people running the companies are generationally out of touch, and not in a bad way,
Mm-hmm.
but the next generation of 25 to 35-year-olds are the ones that you should be attracting as an organization, because they're living the future world right now.
Right.
Companies are trying to adapt, but boy, these are big, big ships, right? And and um, and it's hard to turn, and it's hard to know it if you haven't lived it, right? I often say to companies, you should hire a bunch of 25 to 35-year-olds, put them off site, give them every business that you have, and tell them who's disintermediating it. And if no one's disintermediating it, how should it be disintermediated? Because that's the only way companies going to realize it. They're fighting a rear guard on AI as well, because you've got this, if you're a regulated corporation, I mean, they'd like to probably get rid of 70% of their workforce if they could. But
That's
politically, that doesn't work, right?
Right.
that's
Right.
such an interesting perspective because, forward thinking, when you speak with forward thinkers, right, they're seeing that too. The youth only know AI and the new tech, right?
Yeah.
2, 3 years experience with it is all there is,
Huge. Well,
right?
it's not only 2, 3 years experience. It wasn't here 2, 3 years
Yeah,
ago. So
exactly.
it's like the cannabis world. I remember when I was doing recruiting for him, and he said, "Well, I'm looking for someone with cannabis experience." I said, "Cannabis experience? There was no cannabis business 3 years ago. How could I find someone?" It's the same thing with AI. I mean, there's no one with 10 years AI experience, right? In the workforce, and so it's really difficult. But um, it's kind of it's moving up and accelerating at the same time, and so it's hard for companies to keep up that pace while running their business, which is old and slow and bricks and mortar type of thing, right?
So I think this is interesting because when you speak with leaders and hiring managers, and you see it in the news all the time, the recent graduates are struggling to find work. And yet, I think when you look at the skills they have and the way they think and consume products, they're the key to the future.
They are, but the problem is the people doing the hiring don't know how to use them.
Mm.
They're interviewing them, and their skills that they're like, I don't know where to put that. Where's the box to put that person in? Well, the reality is there's no more box anymore, right?
And I think that goes back to your earlier point of why, for especially for, upcoming grads and recent grads, why kind of the removal of the resume not being their main source of truth is so important. What you're saying is like share the tools you've used, how well versed you are at social media, the tech that you live every single day, the Reddit articles you read on advancements in technology, right? Like leverage your sphere and your knowledge and bring that, because you may not have this long list of experience, but you have something else that's very important for the future of their business.
Everybody's got experience, and if you don't if you don't showcase who you are, how are they going to know who you are? I always say set the table, tell them who you are, and get away from the so tell me a time when you had this to deal with and how you
Right.
handled it and those
Right.
types of old
Yeah.
questions, right? And you're
Tell
just sort of going,
me then.
exactly. You're going, okay, fine. And then you go down this road. And I will tell you, and my book is available for free on my website. And I encourage people to read it because it really has made a big difference in a lot of young, middle aged, and old people in changing the dynamics of how they see themselves and their lens. And they could just go to my website and download the book for free. But back to your point is you want to find out whether they're looking for you. But how do they know if they're looking for you if you don't know who you are? And it's amazing. The more honest and forthright and candid that you are, the higher the probability you get the right job for yourself.
We're talking about, the influx of automation in the workforce. What roles, let's talk here first. What roles do you feel are particularly like under threat these days because of AI?
Any process job, any job where you're just kind of, being on the production line, any of those things. A friend of mine who wrote the foreword of my book, Dominic Barton, was in China and told me about a robotics company that was rolling off robots like something out of Utopia. And I said, well, that must have been interesting. He goes, what was interesting is there was no people running the robotics company. Robots were running the robotics company. And I think that's this future. And there's, you know, anything that's a process driven job will probably be gone at some point and very quickly. And it's starting to happen. And you're going to have to reposition, reskill people to do different things. And you, as the individual, are going to have to figure out now what are they going to pay me for. But I think our kids' generation won't have an issue because they know how to apply themselves to different aspects of the workforce. Really, the people most at risk are the 45 to 55-year-old people. They're the most at risk. The people that are 55 to 65, the end is in sight of retirement, and they just got to hold on. And if they can't hold on, they'll probably get a good package that'll ride them out to the end. 25 to 35-year-old, the world is their oyster, and it's moving at a pace that they're used to and comfortable with. The 45 to 55-year-old people that have basically been on an assembly line stamping are the ones that are most in danger.
And so, how do you feel a job seeker figures out how automation and AI really fits into finding what you call a true fit?
I think that, if you're going to use AI to ask the questions and sort of say, what's the right fit for me? I think it will take the information about yourself and it'll tell you, and it's probably what I try to get you to do in the book in a much faster way. I know when I have a third book coming out, it's called The CEO's Caddy. And when I put the book into AI, it came back and it said, this fits identically with your personality of your first two books and so on and so on. There's no divergence and anything else. So as opposed to thinking about that, was it is it or is it not? I had confirmation immediately. So I think using AI to reconfirm that I am who I am and I'm coming across this way will be very powerful for candidates.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think the key to what you're saying is know who you are, right? And I think that translates so well to, what we're seeing the future going. You say AI will do a lot of the process work, has the answers, but people need to still manage those answers, right?
Right. Yeah.
Dial them in, make sure, and that requires judgment, and that requires, understanding who you are. And I think that process is just something we've come across more and more in the job hunt, that the job hunt is taking longer than it has in the past. And there's almost a soul searching that's going on with candidates these days, right? That I think is very new, that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago even. And, what I hear today, we're really coming through loud and clear. Know who you are, know who you want to be and what you want to do, and find that job. And
Right.
it's like success.
And the thing is, when you have that sort of stability in that one piece, then everything else, and you're seeking your target rich environment where they need you and they want you. But how do they know they need you and they want you if they don't know who you actually are?
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this for a long time, and it's remarkable to me how hard it is to deprogram ourselves from pitching, from trying to sell ourselves into a job, from trying to make the resume look the right way, to just, this is who I am. And I'm looking for resonance. Even when I pitch for clients now, I'll say to people, I'm going to tell you exactly who I am, what I'm good at, people I'd like to work best with, and so on and so on. And if the answer is no, I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is yes, that's great. And people still at the end say to me, can I tell you how to improve that pitch? And I go, no, improve what pitch? That's who I am. There's no pitch here, right?
Oh, thank you.
Like, this is who I am. I'm obnoxious. I'm loud. I'm, forthright, and
Right.
best served unvarnished. Like, if you could be a little more like, no, I can't be a little more like that. And it took me a long time in my life to own myself, because
Mm-hmm.
I was always trying to pretzel and despite my success and everything else, I was never fully comfortable, never felt fully utilized until, I said, okay, the hell with it. I'm going to be me. And there may not be a marketplace for me, but I found that there's a pretty big one and a good one. And the more me I am, the more of the right clients I keep finding, right?
Yeah. That's great. I mean, you've really shared some remarkable words of wisdom and advice, and to be authentically you and lean into that. And I think our listeners are really gonna value that and learn from that. So, Jim, I would love to give you an opportunity just to close with a little bit more about your book, maybe your website, just so our listeners know where they can go find those resources. That would be great.
The website's www.jimbeqaj.com. My first book was How to Hire the Perfect Employer. My second book is True Fit, How to Find the Right Job by Being You. My third book's coming out at some point. It'll be all digital, and there's an audio book called CEO's Caddy, because I realized the difference between coaching individuals. It's a singular lens, Whereas the CEOs and business leaders that I coach have multiple issues. One, first and foremost, is what kind of leader am I? Am I all roads lead to me? Because if that's the way I run my business, then I need a different set of people around me because they're all going to be competitive because they only deal with me. Or do I run my business collaboratively in that we all decide on how to run it? I have an extra vote, but it's a collaborative effort. I need different people for that, right? I need people that can work cross function, cross people. And what I realized is there's a lot of similarities to being a caddy. Not that I've ever been a caddy, but I've used them, and that they're not actually teaching you how to hit the ball, but at those moments where you need them, that's where they show up. And each chapter in all my books have the same sort of pattern, is that I have the people that I coach tell their stories. Because I actually believe that people resonate better with listening to someone talk about themselves as me going, blah, 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 you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. And it's remarkable to me and very satisfying how many people say, oh, you know Mary in your book? And I said, yeah, yeah. And I feel exactly like her. Or, you know, Bill in your book. And so for me, I never wrote the books to make any money. I wrote the book to change people's lives. And that's my whole mission, to get people to get into a positive way about looking at themselves. And that will turn into finding the right fit. And I think if you follow this prescription, nobody knows where that ending is. And I'm not a sort of destination shopper. I believe that follow the right journey. People that I've coached have ended up in jobs that would never have been on their radar screen. If you read the book and you want me to help you out, I know it's a big offer, but just send me an email. I'm happy to respond. Send me your infomercial. I'll give you my opinion on the infomercial.
That's great.
That's great.
Well, Jim, congrats on all your success. I think you're, a welcomed and like fresh leader in this space that, people in our audience and even beyond really need. So it was great hearing from you today, and we thank you for your time. All right. Well, that was a fantastic discussion with Jim. I think really my takeaways, and I hopefully for our audience, is like to really that be bold, be you, don't try to differentiate from that. And I loved his perspective on the resume and kind of like what it was versus what it is now. And he said, now it's more of like where I've been. And, I think he just was a pleasure. I look forward to checking out his books, even the caddy one. So it was wonderful. What do you think, Heiko?
Yeah, no, I thought his advice was just so grounded in practical reality and happiness, right? And if in this world where, people are under scrutiny, right? Every job is, what's the purpose of that job? Being able to find what motivates you and makes you happy, but also how that contributes to the organization. No matter, right, the job you get hired into is very likely not the job you're going to be doing 2 or 3 years from now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think what's interesting is, how that corresponds to the hiring process that's in place today, right? Hiring today seems to be more of a factory and processing applicants and individuals. And how do those two marry up? What really comes across is that more conversations are needed. And right now it's a process and a factory, right? And I think that's for the talent acquisition industry. I think that there's a lot of practical advice there. How do we get to having more conversations with people and less processing?
Thanks for listening to We Are All Worker Bees, a podcast about the changing world of work and the people navigating it. If something in this episode resonated with you, follow us on LinkedIn or subscribe on your favorite listening app to keep up with new episodes. We Are All Worker Bees is a production of the Sonar Network, produced by Katie Lohr and edited by Jamie Carlisle. And if you want to keep the conversations going, whether you're job hunting or trying to hire, you can talk to Worker Bee 24/7 at workerbee.ai.